following a presidential approval, the Central Bank of Nigeria, African Finance Corporation, Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, with the CBN acting as a chair of the Infraco, will be investing at least 50 billion naira from the Infraco equity in the Nigerian Commodities Exchange to reposition the exchange as a world-class exchange. The ultimate plan is to reposition it, re-strategize it to profitability. President Buhari has approved the move to develop and implement a strategic repositioning for the exchange, which has remained comatose for several years. At an inaugural meeting of the steering committee on this task on Thursday, Godwin Emefiele, Central Bank Governor, said that despite huge gains made by the AFEX Bank in the agricultural sector, there remain significant challenges, particularly within the Nigerian agricultural commodities value chain, which needed to be tackled in order to accelerate investment and productivity.
Meeting of critical stakeholders, which is aimed at putting in place the enabling structures and framework that will lead to repositioning of the Nigerian Commodities Exchange into a commercially viable platform in Nigeria for delivering efficient pricing of Nigeria's agri-produce, among others. In doing this, the key objective of this gathering today will be to brief stakeholders on Mr. President's recent approval of a proposal to reposition the Nigeria Commodities Exchange and thereafter discuss the modalities for repositioning this institution. As you are aware, the federal government, along with the Central Bank of Nigeria, has implemented several intervention programs in the agriculture and manufacturing sectors aimed at boosting employment generation and wealth creation, reducing our dependence on imported food items, conserving our foreign exchange earnings, and spurring economic growth in Nigeria. These interventions in the agri sector, particularly the Anchor Borers Program and the Commodities Development Initiative, have sought to strengthen key agricultural commodities value chains, enable improved productivity in the agricultural sector, and increase sourcing of inputs locally by stakeholders in the manufacturing sector. I'm sure those who understand the working of.
All right, joining me now from the private sector side of things is Akinyinka Akintunde, Vice President, Financial Markets for Private Commodities Exchange, AFEX. Good to have you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. So we just heard from the Central Bank Governor there talking about re-strategizing the Nigerian Commodities Exchange, and he's also talked about price moderation, stabilizing rising food prices. You are a licensed private commodities exchange, AFEX. Can you explain how Commodities Exchange can moderate rising food prices, if possible?
Thank you for that, Rotus, and it's good to be here on this program discussing this. There's a tendency for us to look at this positioning in isolation, as opposed to look at it as a holistic approach to price stabilization. Now, as a commodities exchange, the role of the exchange is very clearly defined, right, which is in terms of ensuring price discovery of commodities or products traded on its platform. Now, Nigeria is in a very, very peculiar situation right now where you're battling with a lot of factors, from production to accessibility of inputs to storage, and then eventually the logistics part of it plays a critical role. For an exchange to be able to operate efficiently, there's the need for an harmonious approach of all key stakeholders in executing this mandate, which is the perspective I believe the Central Bank Governor is coming from, which is if you have a commodities exchange in place, then you have an entity that serves to coordinate all stakeholders and players across the value chain in achieving the objective of price stability. And for you to get there, then you need to have a central position where all interventions and programs of the central bank as a key player in price stability of agricultural produce could effectively utilize this in stabilizing prices. So from the CBN's perspective, it's going to be more like a policy transmission entity that ensures that their interventions are end-to-end inclusive and is not only targeted at a single point of the value chain, but converges at the point of the commodities exchange, where buyers, sellers could have access to what the true price of these commodities are, and then you get value derived for all key stakeholders across the entity. And when you have that in place, you discover that speculations will be mostly curtailed because everybody has access to a transparent system for pricing these commodities, and everybody could actually see what the prices are, and then there are modalities for implementing logistics for the transportation, storage, and efficient operationalization of commodities in the ecosystem.
Fantastic. All right, so speaking of the ecosystem, since you mentioned that, what happens to the market when you have a public and private commodity exchange? Is there room for more? Is more better?
It depends on the perspective you're coming from. Ideally, or if you look at it from the economic perspective, more players mean efficiency, right, and competition in the ecosystem, which would ensure that there's fair play in the ecosystem. Now, the other part would now be when you have different stakeholders running the same entity in different firms, how do you ensure that there's fair play and efficiency? Now, the CBN is coming up with this plan to revitalize an exchange. Now, the question is, how do they do it? Is it going to add value as a whole, which to a large extent is presumed? Now, to another perspective, is there going to be a level playing ground for all entities playing there? We've seen a lot of engagement from my own firm and the CBN and other key policy regulators over the past couple of years in terms of putting policies together to shape the ecosystem and then effective products and transmission entities that could ensure that CBN's policy gets seamlessly into the ecosystem. I believe this move is in the right direction by the CBN, and then it will bring in more fair play and stability in what we experience currently in the ecosystem. And to a large extent, it will ensure that the CBN's transmission policies or CBN's policies are seamlessly transmitted into an efficient market in the way they actually play and implement this.
Excellent stuff. Now, I want to get to your, you have a report, Commodities Outlook for 2021. Your report looks at the number of commodities. I want to start with maize. You said, you mentioned in your report that China will play a role in price determination for maize in 2021. How does that work out?
China is one of the largest consumers of maize on a global scale. And in recent months, we've seen increased demand in terms of their consumption needs, right? So late last year, in the global market, we see prices of corn futures inching up to an all-time high in the global market. Now, and when you look at the physical consumption, we've seen a projected 70 to 100% increase in what China currently consumes, projected to be what they will be taking on in 2021. Now, when a single entity is one of the largest players is increasing its demand by 100%, then you're likely going to see a shift in the international play of supply and demand of these commodities. Maize is one of the key commodities that is consumed because it has a whole use across the feed milling industry, and the demand plays a critical role. Now, there was news in the media about a week ago saying China is importing about 1.2 million tons from the US. Now, this is significantly higher than what they've done before. And if this could continue based on the projections and then the pricing on the international markets, you'll see a ripple effect on a local market like Nigeria, even though to a large extent, as it is right now, we don't export maize, we don't import maize. But in terms of pricing and efficiency of the utilization and production of what we do currently, there would be a huge impact on how this affects our local markets.
Stuff. Now, what about, I believe, still on maize rather, remember the central bank had sent out a circular that halted the use of Form M for the importation of maize in order to boost local production. Then I think September or so of last year, the Nigerian Customs Service confirmed 4 companies which were granted approval for the importation of maize. Outside of China, what domestic factors can affect price supply outlooks for that commodity for maize?
So if you look at the agricultural landscape in Nigeria, we have a serious production deficit currently, right? And then the CBN, based on their role in the market and then the level of visibility they have on activities, especially on the AFEX part, they came up with the policy of not allowing foreign-based importation. But as also expected from an entity that is committed to improving the productivity of the local markets. When you listen to markets and you get information that there's a huge deficit, then the onus is on you to make the appropriate policy decision, which is what they did by allowing some companies import this. But that's on one side, right? So they were able to mitigate scarcity at that point to ensure that we have enough produce to work locally. Now, the other part is we are currently deficient in production. Are there structures that need to be put in place to increase local production capacity? And the CBN is heavy on this in terms of putting in structures in place to promote both dry season farming and wet season farming in the country. Currently, our production in Nigeria is about between 10 and 11 million metric tons. Demand is about 500 to 600,000 metric tons higher than that. If we could supplement our current wet season production with dry season production, we could see a likely tightening of the scarcity gap, right? Meaning the importation of maize will not have an effect on the local system on one hand, which is a good move by the CBN. And we see all efforts from their own side in terms of ensuring access to credit by smallholder farmers, encouraging them to go to produce for the wet season, which we're likely to see by the third quarter of the year. Now, the other part which we need to put in place as a country, and I think which is one of the focus of the CBN, is to ensure that we have enough stock that will take us to at least 1 year's supply in the country, right? If you look at most developed entities, most developed economies, the current year consumption is usually based on previous year's production, meaning they have a whole season, a whole year for adequate planning, analysis of supply gap, and then putting in appropriate mechanism in place to ensure that scarcity is mitigated and any external shock to food security and sustainability is being mitigated. This is a step in the right direction by the CBN late last year, and we've seen them putting more efforts in place to ensure increased local production by all key stakeholders. And going forward, we expect them to continue this engagement with the private sector and associations that are involved in commodities production to ensure that the scarcity gap is greatly mitigated, and then we have the capacity to increase local production as a country.
Fantastic stuff. I think we've got less than a minute to go. Is there, you know what, this question would take more than a minute. Akinyinka Akintunde, Vice President, Financial Markets at AFEX, thank you so much for taking us through what to look forward to a commodities exchange on the public side and the private side. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.